Welcome back, everyone. We're diving back into Nursery of the Gods by James Cobban.
Picking up with chapter 2 this time.
Yeah, chapter 2. It's where Cobban really gets into materialism. That concept that still shapes so much of how we think today, especially in science.
And he doesn't just keep it theoretical either. He links those ideas to how we view, well, everything, really.
Exactly. Like those old school astronomers who were stuck on the Earth being the center of the universe. They just kept making their model more and more complicated to fit what they were observing.
Adding epicycles on top of epicycles.
Right. Cobban seems to be saying that materialism might be doing something similar today, trying to make the model fit no matter how complicated it gets.
Interesting. But before we go too far, maybe we should define materialism, just so we're all on the same page. What's Cobban actually critiquing here?
So he lays out 5 core assumptions. He calls them axioms. And that's interesting in itself, right? Because an axiom is something you take for granted, a starting point. You don't question it.
And that's where he starts to get really thought-provoking, because he's suggesting these axioms, these things we treat as scientific bedrock, they aren't necessarily proven facts. They're more like underlying beliefs, and they can really color how science is done.
Okay, so what are these axioms?
He lists them as reality, locality, causality, continuity, and determinism.
Those sound like they're straight out of a philosophy lecture, not a science lab. What do they actually mean in practice?
You're right, they do have that philosophical ring to them, but that's Cobban's point, isn't it? He's saying these philosophical ideas have become so ingrained that we don't even realize how much they're shaping our understanding of, well, everything.
It's like we're wearing these invisible glasses that are distorting how we see the world.
Exactly. Let's start with the first axiom, reality. Cobban also calls it strong objectivity. It basically says that the universe exists out there on its own, whether we're looking at it or not. Totally independent of our minds.
Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. I mean, my coffee cup doesn't just disappear when I close my eyes.
Right. But here's where Cobban digs a little deeper. He connects this idea back to Descartes. The whole separating mind and matter thing.
Sure, the foundation of modern science.
Yeah, and it was a game changer for science. It gave science the freedom to explore the material world without having to, worry about all that messy consciousness stuff.
But then what happens to consciousness? How does materialism explain things like subjective experience, our thoughts, feelings, all of that?
That's the million-dollar question. And Cobban argues that materialism doesn't really have a good answer. It kind of tries to shoehorn consciousness in as a side effect of matter. He calls it an epiphenomenon.
So like saying, yeah, consciousness exists, but it's just a byproduct of brain activity. Nothing to see here, folks.
Right, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And that leads us to the next axiom, locality, or what Cobban sometimes calls local realism. This one basically says that objects can only affect each other through direct contact. No spooky action at a distance allowed.
Like billiard balls on a pool table. They have to actually touch to influence each other.
Exactly. But then, we have things like quantum entanglement, where two particles are linked across huge distances, and they seem to be talking to each other instantaneously. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance.
Right. Which throws a wrench into that whole locality idea, doesn't it? It's like the universe isn't quite as locally real as we thought. So what's next on our list of axioms?
Causality. The good old cause and effect. You flip a switch, the light turns on. Seems simple enough.
But knowing Cobban, I'm pretty sure there's more to it than that.
You're getting to know him. He does acknowledge that time flowing from cause to effect seems pretty logical on the surface. But then he points to all this research in quantum physics, neuroscience, even parapsychology, all hinting that time might be a lot more complex than we realize. It might not be as simple and straightforward as our everyday experience tells us.
So maybe we need to rethink that whole cause and effect thing.
It's almost like those optical illusions, You can see two different images depending on how you look at it.
Right. What we think is this clear cause and effect. Maybe it's just our limited view of time that makes it seem that way.
It's definitely a mind bender. Anyway, that leads us to the next axiom on Cobban's list, continuity.
Continuity.
Yeah, this one's all about smoothness. The idea that nature, space, time, they don't really have these sudden jumps or breaks. Everything just flows like a continuous line.
I'm sensing a theme here. It's like Cobban is pointing out how all these assumptions, these things that seem like common sense, they might actually be limiting us.
Exactly. Like they're blinding us to other possibilities, to phenomena that don't fit neatly into our little boxes.
So, like, our insistence that these axioms are absolute truths might be keeping us from seeing the bigger picture.
Right. But we've still got one more axiom to unpack: determinism.
Okay, determinism. Lay it on me. What does that even mean in this materialism framework?
Well, determinism, at least how it's often interpreted in this context, it basically says that if you had a snapshot of the universe right now at this exact moment,
Okay.
if you knew the position and momentum of every single particle, you could theoretically predict the entire future of the universe.
Whoa. So everything is predetermined. There's no such thing as free will. That's a pretty big pill to swallow.
It is. And Cobban doesn't shy away from those implications. He talks about this paradox determinism creates when it comes to free will and, well, moral responsibility.
Yeah, if everything is predetermined, then how can we be held accountable for our actions? I mean, did I really choose to have this extra cup of coffee this morning? Or was that decision made billions of years ago?
It's a real head scratcher, and it's a question that, frankly, philosophers and scientists have been wrestling with for centuries.
For sure. So is Cobban saying there's no such thing as free will?
Well, he doesn't necessarily say that. He's more interested in getting us to rethink what we even mean by free will.
Yeah.
Maybe we need a more nuanced understanding of how choice actually works, especially if we're dealing with a universe that might operate according to laws we don't fully grasp yet.
So not necessarily denying free will, but just like expanding our definition of it.
Right. And this is where he brings in a really fascinating concept from psychology. It's this exercise developed by Charles Tart called the Western Creed.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of that. It's pretty intense.
It is, and Cobban uses it to show just how powerful emotionally and philosophically it can be to really embrace a purely materialistic worldview, especially that idea of determinism we were just talking about.
For our listeners who haven't encountered the Western Creed before, can you give us a quick rundown? What's the point of this exercise?
Sure. The Western Creed, as Cobban uses it, it's basically this series of statements that summarize, the core beliefs of a materialist perspective. And the idea is to read these statements and not just think about them intellectually, but to actually try to feel what it would be like to believe them at your core, really believe them.
It's like trying on a new belief system for size, right?
Yes. And he doesn't sugarcoat it either. The Western Creed is pretty stark. It starts off by saying that this material universe is all there is. No soul, no afterlife, no higher power, just atoms and energy blindly following physical laws.
And it doesn't get any less intense from there. I remember when I first read it, it was kind of a gut punch.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit unsettling. It makes you confront this very bleak view of reality, there's no inherent meaning or purpose.
Just this cosmic abyss.
Yeah.
And everything you value, love, compassion, even the very act of questioning, it's all reduced to just chemical reactions in your brain.
Which brings us back to your point about free will. If everything is predetermined, if all those thoughts and feelings are just products of our biology and environment,
Right.
what does that say about our capacity for genuine choice or moral responsibility?
Heavy stuff. So it's almost like the Western Creed is this mirror, forcing us to confront the implications, maybe even the uncomfortable ones, of this worldview that has become so embedded in our thinking that we don't even question it anymore.
And that's really Cobban's point. He's not trying to tell anyone what to believe, but he does want us to be intellectually honest, to be willing to question our assumptions, even the ones that seem fundamental.
Because if we're not careful, those unquestioned assumptions, they can harden into dogmas, even in science. It's like that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If we only approach science with this materialism hammer, are we missing out on things? Like maybe the universe is more nuanced, more interconnected than we realize.
Right. And to be fair to Cobban, he's not saying we need to throw out science altogether. Not at all. He clearly values scientific inquiry, but he is pushing for a more open approach, one that's not afraid to question those deep-seated assumptions.
It's like he's saying, hey, science is great, but let's not be afraid to peek beyond the edges of what's considered scientific. We should follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it takes us somewhere unexpected.
I like that. Follow the evidence wherever it leads. And he's suggesting that materialism, while useful, might not be the whole story. What if, and this is a big what if consciousness isn't just a side effect of matter?
Okay, yeah, what if it's not?
What if it's a fundamental force in the universe?
That would change everything. I mean, our whole understanding of physics, psychology, spirituality, It would be like looking at a flat picture and suddenly someone hands you 3D glasses.
Exactly. By clinging so tightly to materialism, are we limiting ourselves? Maybe we're missing out on exploring the really big mysteries, things like creativity, intuition, even those moments where we feel deeply connected to something larger than ourselves.
Those aha moments,
Hmm.
synchronicities, that gut feeling that tells you something's right, even if you don't have all the facts.
Exactly. And Cobban isn't afraid to go there. He talks about things like parapsychology and transpersonal psychology fields that have often been kind of shunned by mainstream science.
Right, but if we're really going to follow the evidence wherever it leads, like he's suggesting, we can't just dismiss information that doesn't fit our current theories. We have to be open to the possibility that our definition of science might need to expand.
100%. And that takes some courage, doesn't it? The willingness to challenge our own biases and entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, the universe is more amazing and mysterious than we ever imagined.
Cobban definitely leaves us with more questions than answers. But that's kind of the beauty of it, right? He sparks that curiosity, gets us thinking critically, and hopefully he leaves us a little more open to new possibilities. So, to everyone listening, here's something to ponder. What if, just for a moment, you consider the possibility that materialism isn't the whole story? What if consciousness is a fundamental force in the universe? How would that change your perspective? What amazing discoveries might we make if we just dare to look beyond the current paradigms? Keep those questions coming, keep diving deep, and until next time, keep those minds open.